In a quiet corner of Paris, far from the bustling city center, there was an old apartment building with peeling paint and creaky wooden stairs. On the third floor lived a young woman who spent most of her nights awake, lost in thought. Her name wasn't important. What mattered was the way she poured her heart into the piano. She wasn't just playing notes. She was telling stories without words, stories that lingered long after the last key had been pressed. Her tiny studio was crammed with things: stacks of sheet music teetering on shelves, faded posters of famous composers pinned to the walls, and piles of books about scales and harmony. But at the center of it all stood her pride and joy: a grand piano, its glossy surface reflecting the soft glow of a desk lamp. It was her world, her escape, her everything. Yet lately, something fell off. The room, once filled with warmth and inspiration, now seemed suffocating. Like a bird trapped in a cage, she played endlessly but never felt free. Every night followed the same rhythm. After finishing her rehearsals for upcoming concerts, shows she dreaded more than anything, she'd sit down at the piano and let her fingers wander. Without even thinking, they found their way to sad melodies. Slow, mournful tunes that sounded like whispers of rain or echoes of distant memories. No one asked her to play these pieces. They weren't part of any concert program, but they came out anyway, as if her hands had minds of their own. The truth was, she didn't fully understand where these songs came from. Maybe it was the weight of years spent chasing perfection, trying to meet expectations set by teachers and critics alike. Or maybe it was something deeper, buried beneath layers of unspoken feelings. Whatever it was, the music carried a heaviness that matched her mood. It was as though the piano knew what she couldn't say aloud, that despite her talent and success, she often felt empty inside. Sometimes, when the melody grew too raw, tears would well up in her eyes. But she always blinked them away quickly, ashamed of showing weakness even when no one was watching. Outside, the city slept, oblivious to the quiet battle being waged within those four walls. Inside, the music swelled and faded, filling the silence with both beauty and sorrow. Little did she know, someone was listening. From across the street, hidden in the shadows, a figure stood motionless, captivated by the haunting sounds drifting through the open window. For now, though, she remained unaware, caught up in her private symphony of sadness. Isco expand crow without heading 400 words Mayan simple English words. Part 2. It should be interesting, and every part should be engaging so the audience doesn't get bored. Also keep the wording simple and natural tone. Also make the script human-centric and don't give feel of AI-generated. Also don't create violated content, which can affect YouTube policy. Also don't use names like Marcus, Sarah, Emma, Jamal, etc. It was one of those nights when the rain seemed to echo her mood perfectly. The droplets tapped against the window pane, creating a soft rhythm that blended with the melancholic tunes she played on the piano. She didn't notice at first, too lost in her own world, but something outside felt different. There was a presence, faint but undeniable, like a shadow lingering where it shouldn't be. When she finally turned her head toward the window, her fingers froze mid-note. Across the street, standing under the flickering glow of a lamppost, was a man. He wasn't doing anything unusual, just standing there with his hands tucked into the pockets of his coat. His face was partially hidden by the brim of a worn-out hat, but his posture suggested he was completely absorbed in the music spilling out of her apartment. For a moment, she wondered if she was imagining him, if exhaustion and loneliness had finally gotten the better of her. But no, he was real, and he was still there. Her heart raced. Was this some kind of creepy stalker situation? Or maybe he was just a random passerby who happened to stop for shelter from the rain. Either way, she didn't like being watched, especially not while she played these deeply personal pieces that felt like exposing her soul to the world. She closed the window abruptly, cutting off the flow of sound, and pulled the curtains shut. That should do it, she thought. Let it move along. But the next night, as she sat down at the piano again, curiosity got the better of her. Slowly, cautiously, she peeked through the gap in the curtains. Sure enough, he was there again, standing in the exact same spot. This time, though, he wasn't alone. The rain had stopped, and a few other people were scattered around the street, hurrying home or chatting quietly. Yet none of them paid any attention to him. Only he stood still, almost statuesque, as if rooted to the pavement. She couldn't deny it anymore. He was there for her music. Every time she played, he showed up, never moving closer, never speaking, just listening. It was unnerving, yes, but also strangely comforting. In a way, it made her feel less invisible. Most days, she went about her life feeling like no one truly understood her. Not her friends, not her colleagues, not even herself. But here was this stranger, drawn to her melodies like they held some secret meaning only he could decipher. That's when another thought crossed her mind. What if he did understand? What if, somehow, he heard the sadness, the longing, the unspoken pain woven into every note? The idea both thrilled and terrified her. Who was this person, and why did he care so much about her music? Over the next few nights, she found herself playing louder, letting the notes carry farther, almost daring him to stay. And he did. Night after night, he returned, always silent, always watching, until she began to wonder if he might hold answers to questions she hadn't even asked yet. Isco Expand Crow without heading 400 words Mayan simple English words. Part 3. It should be interesting, and every part should be engaging so the audience doesn't get bored. Also keep the wording simple and natural tone. Also make the script human-centric and don't give feel of AI generated. Also don't create violated content, which can affect YouTube policy. Also don't use names like Marcus, Sarah, Emma, Jamal, etc. The next morning, as sunlight filtered through the cracks in her curtains, she stepped out of her apartment to grab the newspaper. But something unexpected caught her eye, a small white envelope lying on the floor just outside her door. At first, she thought it might be a bill or some promotional flyer, but when she picked it up, she realized it was addressed to her. There was no stamp, no return address, just her name written neatly in cursive. Her heart skipped a beat. Who would leave her a letter? She glanced down the hallway, half expecting to see someone lingering nearby, but the corridor was empty. Back inside, she carefully opened the envelope and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. The message was short, almost too simple, yet it sent a shiver down her spine. Your music speaks what words cannot. Please don't stop. At the bottom of the page was a small sketch, a crescent moon drawn with delicate strokes. No signature, no explanation, nothing to reveal who had written it. She read the words over and over, each time feeling a mix of emotions bubbling up: curiosity, gratitude, and a pinch of unease. Was this from the stranger across the street? It had to be. Who else could it be? And how long had he been listening to her play? She couldn't shake off the feeling that this wasn't just a random compliment. There was something deeper behind those words, something personal. Maybe whoever wrote it knew what it was like to carry pain without saying a word. Maybe they understood how music could become a lifeline when everything else felt heavy. Whatever the reason, the note stirred something in her she hadn't felt in years, a flicker of hope, however fragile. That night, she found herself staring at the envelope again before sitting down at the piano. She hesitated for a moment, wondering if she should keep the window closed. But then she shook her head, almost laughing at her own hesitation. Why was she so afraid? This person wasn't threatening. They were listening, really listening, in a way most people never did. So instead of shutting the world out, she opened the window wide and began to play. This time, her fingers moved differently. They weren't just tracing familiar patterns. They were searching for something new, something raw. The melody that emerged was slower, softer, filled with a vulnerability she usually kept locked away. As the notes floated into the night air, she imagined them reaching the stranger across the street, carrying her unspoken thoughts along with them. She pictured him standing there under the lamppost, his face tilted toward the sound, hearing not just the music but the ache behind it. For hours, she played, losing track of time. When exhaustion finally pulled her away from the keys, she looked out the window one last time. Sure enough, he was still there, barely visible in the dim light. But tonight, Something about his stance seemed different, less distant, more connected, as if the music had bridged the gap between them. For the first time in weeks, she went to bed feeling lighter, like maybe she wasn't as alone as she'd thought. Isco expand crow without heading 400 words Mayan, simple English words. Part 4. It should be interesting, and every part should be engaging so the audience doesn't get bored. Also keep the wording simple and natural tone. Also make the script human-centric and don't give feel of AI generated. Also don't create violated content, which can affect YouTube policy. Also don't use names like Marcus, Sarah, Emma, Jamal, etc. The following week, curiosity got the better of her. She couldn't keep wondering who the stranger was or why he kept coming back night after night. So, one evening, she decided to step outside during a break in her practice. It wasn't like her to be so bold. She usually avoided people, preferring the solitude of her apartment, but something about him felt different. Maybe it was the way he listened, as if her music mattered more than anything else in the world. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and quietly slipped out of her building. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of rain from earlier that day. Across the street, the lamppost cast its usual golden glow, and sure enough, there he was. He stood with his hands in his coat pockets, his hat tilted low, staring at her window. For a moment, she hesitated, unsure of what to say or do. But then, taking a deep breath, she crossed the road. "Excuse me," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the distant hum of traffic. The man turned slowly, almost as if he'd been expecting her. His face came into view for the first time. He looked older, perhaps in his late 60s, with kind eyes that carried traces of sadness. Up close, she noticed how worn his clothes were, like they'd seen many years of use. But there was a quiet dignity about him that made her feel instantly at ease. "You've been listening to my music," she began, her tone somewhere between accusation and curiosity. "Why?" He smiled faintly, as though he'd been waiting for this question all along. "Because your music speaks to me," he replied simply. His voice was calm, steady, with just a hint of gravel from age. It's honest, raw, like you're letting the piano say what you can't. Her cheeks flushed, caught off guard by his words. "But why do you care? You don't even know me." "Maybe not," he admitted, adjusting his hat slightly. "But I used to write music myself. Once upon a time, I knew what it felt like to pour your soul into something and hope someone hears it. And when I heard you play," he paused, searching for the right words. "It reminded me of those days, of how powerful music can be when it comes from the heart." She blinked, surprised by his confession. "You're a musician?" He corrected gently. "A long time ago. Now I'm just someone who still loves it. Someone who knows how rare it is to find music that feels real." They stood there for a while, neither speaking, the silence between them comfortable rather than awkward. Finally, she broke it. "Do you want to come inside? Just for a little while?" To her relief, he nodded. Back in her apartment, she offered him a chair while she sat at the piano. At first, they talked about simple things, the weather, the neighborhood, but soon their conversation turned to music. He told her about his past, how he'd once composed pieces inspired by life's joys and sorrows, how losing his wife had silenced him, leaving him unable to create anything new, and how hearing her play again had stirred something deep within him. As the night wore on, she realized this wasn't just some random stranger. He understood her in a way few others ever could. By the time he left, promising to return, she felt a spark of connection she hadn't known she needed. Isco expand crow without heading 400 words in simple English words. Part 5. It should be interesting, and every part should be engaging so the audience doesn't get bored. Also keep the wording simple and natural tone. Also make the script human-centric and don't give feel of AI generated. Also don't create violated content, which can affect YouTube policy. Also don't use names like Marcus, Sarah, Emma, Jamal, etc. From that night on, the stranger became a regular visitor. He started coming by almost every evening, not just to listen from afar, but to sit with her in the cozy warmth of her apartment. They talked for hours about music, life, and everything in between. Slowly, she began to see him as more than just a mysterious figure. He was a mentor, a friend, someone who truly understood the weight of emotion she carried inside. One evening, as they sat together, he leaned forward and said, "You're too hard on yourself. Your playing is beautiful. Yes, but it's also controlled. Like you're afraid to let go." She frowned, unsure what he meant. Afraid, she echoed. I've spent years perfecting my technique. I'm not holding back. I'm giving everything I have. He shook his head gently. His expression thoughtful. No, you're giving everything they taught you. The rules, the structure, the discipline. But music isn't just about hitting the right notes or following the sheet. It's about feeling. About breaking free from those invisible chains we build around ourselves. His words lingered in her mind long after he left that night. Was he right? Had she been so focused on perfection that she'd forgotten how to feel? The thought unsettled her, but it also intrigued her. For the first time, she wondered what would happen if she stopped trying to control every note. If she allowed herself to play simply because it felt good, not because it was correct. The next night, she decided to test his advice. Sitting at the piano, she closed her eyes and let her fingers rest lightly on the keys. Instead of thinking about scales or tempo, she focused on the emotions swirling inside her. The loneliness, the longing, the quiet hope she tried so hard to bury. And then, without overthinking it, she began to play. What came out was unlike anything she'd ever created before. The melody was uneven at times, raw and imperfect, but it was alive in a way her previous pieces never were. It was messy, unpredictable, and achingly honest. As the final note faded into silence, she opened her eyes to find him watching her, a soft smile on his face. That, he said quietly, is who you really are. Tears welled up in her eyes, though she didn't try to hide them this time. Playing like that, freely, vulnerably, felt terrifying but liberating all at once. Over the weeks that followed, they worked together, experimenting with new styles and sounds. He encouraged her to write her own compositions, ones that reflected her true self rather than the polished image she'd always strived for. Together, they crafted pieces inspired by their shared experiences of loss and healing, each one more personal than the last. Late nights turned into early mornings as they poured their hearts into the music. Sometimes she'd catch him staring off into the distance, lost in thought, and she'd wonder what memories he was reliving through her melodies. Other times, he'd share stories about his late wife, how she used to hum along to his compositions, filling their home with laughter and love. Those moments made her realize that music wasn't just about expressing pain. It was about celebrating connection, even in its absence. By the time he left each night, she always felt lighter, as though shedding layers of fear she hadn't known. For the first time in years, making music didn't feel like a chore or an obligation. It felt like breathing. Unfiltered, and unfiltered. Disco expand crow without heading 400 words my simple English words. It should be interesting, and every part should be engaging. Every part should be engaging doesn't get bored. So the audience doesn't get keep bored. The wording simple. Also keep the wording simple and natural. Also make the script human-centric and don't give feel of AI. Also don't create violated content which can affect YouTube policy. Also don't use names like Marcus. Sarah, Marcus, Emma, Sarah, Jamal, etc. As weeks turned into months, their late-night sessions became a ritual neither of them wanted to break. But one day, something unexpected happened. The stranger, her mentor and confidant, didn't show up. At first, she thought maybe he was just running late or had gotten caught up with something. But when hours passed and there was still no sign of him, worry began to creep in. The next morning, she decided to visit his place. She didn't know much about where he lived, only that it was somewhere nearby. After asking around, she finally found the address. A small, modest apartment tucked away in a quiet alley. When she knocked on the door, there was no answer. A neighbor peeked out and told her he had fallen ill and been taken to the hospital. Her heart sank. For someone who had always kept people at arm's length, she suddenly realized how much he meant to her. That evening, after finishing her usual practice session, she went to the hospital. Sitting by his bedside, she held his frail hand and played a soft melody on her phone for him. His eyes fluttered open briefly, and though he couldn't speak, he smiled faintly, as if to say thank you. A few days later, he passed away peacefully. It was a loss that hit her harder than she expected. She felt empty, like a part of her had gone silent again. But amidst the grief, she remembered his words, "Music isn't just for us, it's for everyone who needs it." Determined to honor his memory, she poured all her energy into creating an album filled with the pieces they'd worked on together. Each track carried fragments of their journey, the raw emotions, the lessons learned, the bond they shared. She titled it Late Night Piano, a tribute to the countless nights they spent crafting melodies under the cover of darkness. When the album was ready, she hesitated to share it. What if no one understood? What if they dismissed it as too sad, too personal? But then she remembered how her music had touched him, and how his encouragement had changed her life forever. Taking a deep breath, she uploaded the recordings online, adding a heartfelt note explaining the story behind the project. Within days, the response was overwhelming. People from all over the world started leaving comments about how her music helped them sleep, cry, heal, or simply feel less alone. One listener wrote, "Your songs are like a warm hug during my darkest hours." Another said, "I lost someone I loved deeply, and your music makes me feel closer to them." Reading these messages brought tears to her eyes, not of sadness, but of gratitude. Her music, born out of pain and vulnerability, was now doing for others what it had done for her, offering comfort in moments of despair. Soon, radio stations picked up her tracks, and local venues invited her to perform live. Though terrified at first, she stepped onto the stage, letting the spotlight wash over her. As she played, she closed her eyes and imagined him sitting in the front row, nodding along with that same gentle smile. By the end of the performance, the audience erupted into applause, many wiping away tears. For the first time, she realized her music wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to everyone who needed it. Through sharing her story, she discovered a new purpose. Music wasn't just about self-expression, it was about connection. And in connecting with others, she finally found peace within herself. Isco Expand Crow Without Heading 400 Words in Simple English Words, Part 7. It should be interesting, and every part should be engaging so the audience doesn't get bored. Also keep the wording simple and natural tone. Also make the script human-centric, and don't give feel of AI-generated. Also don't create violated content, which can affect YouTube policy. Also don't use names like Marcus, Sarah, Emma, Jamal, etc. Years rolled by, and a young woman who once played her piano in solitude became known as the Midnight Pianist. Her music found its way into homes, cafes, and even hospitals, touching lives across the globe. People began associating her melodies with quiet reflection, sleepless nights, and moments of healing. Yet, despite her growing fame, she never lost sight of why she started: to express what words could not, to honor the bond she shared with a stranger who had changed her life. One chilly autumn morning, she stood before a small crowd gathered at a cemetery on the outskirts of Paris. It wasn't a grand event, just a few people scattered among the tombstones, their breath visible in the crisp air. She carried a single white rose in one hand and a folded sheet of paper in the other. Walking slowly, she approached a grave marked by a simple headstone that read, "A lover of music." Beneath, it was an inscription she had chosen herself: "In memory of the man who taught me to let go." Kneeling down, she placed the rose gently on the ground and unfolded the paper. It was a new composition, one she'd been working on for months. As she sat there, she began to hum softly, letting the melody take shape in her mind. Then, pulling out a portable keyboard from her bag, she pressed the first note. The sound echoed through the stillness of the cemetery, soft yet powerful, like a whisper meant only for him. Each chord told a story, their late-night conversations, his quiet wisdom, the way he'd coaxed her out of her shell. There were moments of sadness, yes, but also gratitude and hope. By the time the final note faded into silence, Tears streamed down her face. For a moment, she closed her eyes, imagining him standing beside her, tipping his hat with that familiar smile. Afterward, she stayed a little longer, tracing her fingers over the engraving on the stone. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You gave me more than I ever realized." As she walked away, she noticed something tucked under a nearby bench, a small sketchbook. Curious, she picked it up and flipped through its pages. Inside were drawings of street scenes, musicians playing instruments, and countless crescent moons. On the last page, written in shaky handwriting, were the words, "Music is eternal because it lives in those who hear it." A lump formed her throat. It must have belonged to him, left behind unintentionally or perhaps purposefully for someone to find. That night, back in her apartment, she placed the sketchbook on her piano alongside the envelope he'd once slipped under her door. Staring at them, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. Fame hadn't changed her, not really. She still spent her nights composing, still poured her heart into every piece. But now, her music carried an extra layer of meaning. It wasn't just about her pain or his lessons anymore. It was about everyone who listened, everyone who found solace in the notes. From then on, whenever she performed live, she ended each concert with the same piece she'd played at his grave. Before starting, she'd pause, look out at the audience, and say simply, "This one's for anyone who's ever needed a friend in the dark." And every time, without fail, the room would fall silent, as if holding its breath, until the final note lingered in the air. Years later, when asked about her success, she always gave the same answer: "I didn't do this alone. Someone believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself." Now all I want is to pay that forward, to remind others that they're never truly alone. And so, her legacy continued, not just as a musician, but as a beacon of hope for anyone seeking comfort in the quiet hours of the night.